The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 27. To be a fool. Retribution. He hadn't burned it, but he'd forgotten that he still had it. It occurred to him that to an observing eye, the scarf wasn't a completely unrecognizable piece of cloth. He buried it into a shirt again and shoved it in the bottom of his trunk. Lying back down on his bed, Harry firmly closed the curtains and relished into the darkness that surrounded him. He breathed in, breathed out, breathed in. Opening the strange advanced potions-making book he had discovered only a few weeks ago, he slowly trailed his fingers over the prince's notes. The handwriting was turned and flawless, scribbled with the same black ink that had crossed off most of the book's original paragraphs. Furrowing his brows, he turned to the pages one after another, looking for clues. A name, a date, something. He'd ask Slughorn if he wasn't afraid that he'd take it away from him. He'd ask Dumbledore too, but Dumbledore seemed determined to not let a single minute of their meetings be wasted. Tom Riddle's memories were crucial. Harry had to see them all. He had to understand them all. "Are you right, mate?" Harry blinked at the sound of Ron's sleepy voice. "Yup. Reading that thing again?" "Uh-huh. Always thinking." Prince. Images of knights with white horses popped into Harry's mind, and he couldn't help but entertain the mental image of an actual prince hiding somewhere in the castle. The textbook's yellowish pages indicated that it was old, and Harry wondered whether the prince was someone he knew, some old ghost, or maybe someone living in the shadows of the forest out of sight for years and years, observing silently, waiting for someone to discover his precious potions copy, waiting for someone to understand him. Would Snape or Remus know anything about it? Dumbledore would. But Harry couldn't ask, not after what happened with Tom Riddle's diary. They'd think him a fool. No one could know. "Harry?" "Yes," Harry said absently. It was a strange nickname for one to have. It had to be someone clever enough to create all these spells and potions. Someone who, if he was still alive, was now probably powerful. And beautiful, too, Harry hoped. He quietly chuckled to himself. That prince image with the horse and all that had stuck in his mind was really irritating. "If you don't want to talk, just say so. I wanted to say something important, and I'm not going to say it if you're not listening." Harry sighed. "What is it, Ron?" "If you hurt Ginny, I'll hate you." Harry closed the book. He didn't open the curtains. "I don't want to hate you," Ron added in a whisper, his bravery fading into uncertainty. He'd been thinking hard, Harry realized. Long silences weren't something Ron did, and if he was thinking about it... "Why are you telling me this now?" Harry asked with a hint of panic. A breath was released sharply, and Harry held his own. "I don't know, because she's my little sister, maybe, if you... well... Hermione said..." Harry's thumb caressed the hard cover as the tension intensified. Had Ron found out? Impossible. Part of Harry's mind told him that whatever had once possessed him was now over. He was normal, but Ginny, and happy. Another part of his mind drifted far away still, wondering if the book at hand was dangerous or even cursed. "I can overlook that you're kissing her," Ron said, "but if you do more than that, you can't hurt her. She's been getting on the family's nerves talking about you since she was 11. Do you get what that means? You're not just a boyfriend to her. I don't know if she loves you, but she cares about you. Everyone knows that." Harry nodded, even though Ron couldn't see it. He loved Jenny. He loved her with all his heart, just as he loved Ron and Fred and George and their parents. The Weasleys were his family, the only family he ever had. "I know, Ron. You're reading that book again, aren't you? You're not paying attention. I told you I wanted you to listen to me." "I'm not reading, I'm listening." And he did, but he preferred not to. He doubted that he could ever think about Ginny again without that weight of immense guilt inside him. The pages fell open again on his lap, and he saw a note about a spell called Muffliato. "Forget it. Good night, Harry." "Night, Ron." Harry's hypocrisy disgusted him. He hated treating Ron like that. He hated failing in being normal in all aspects of his life. He was trying. He was really trying. So why was he only making it worse for himself? He was pathetic. Harry's life was so empty that he now needed a potions book to fill it. He closed the copy with a thump. Nothing felt important anymore or interesting. He breathed in, breathed out. Where calmness used to be, there now was a ripped open hole which he found himself constantly poking at in the daytime and falling in at night. He missed Snape like hell. Longbottom's face was priceless. As Severus watched him scratch his temple with his quill and goggle his watering eyes, he felt a hint of sadness for the fact that sketching had never been his calling. If it had, Longbottom's utter disappointment would have been the ultimate moment he'd enjoy to capture in the finest detail, so he could look at it later on and have a laugh whenever he felt grim. 10 minutes, he announced. It was beyond him how Severus was doomed to still teach in these horribly depressing classrooms. He pictured Slughorn comfortably sitting in Severus's old potions classroom just a few floors below, and he mentally summoned whatever Hogwarts ghost might have been listening to go and haunt him. It wouldn't make much of a difference anyway. People who chose Hogwarts over their freedom were always being haunted by something. Duty, promises, honor, ghosts. Severus was teaching defense, and everything was still the same. His release from the dungeons only added to the irony that his life was. 20 days for the end of term. 2.5 months without Potter giving him a headache. It was acceptable. No, it was good. And it would have been better if Potter showed the slightest indication of overall mental improvement. A teenage boy suffering from unholy nightmares should seek professional help, he supposed. But of course Potter's nightmares weren't the kind one could talk about with a therapist. He doubted there was a therapist out there that could even speak the Dark Lord's name. As though you can. Time is up. Hand over your scrolls. He extended his hand as he walked between the desks. These snotty children would be the adults of this world someday. Hopefully Severus wouldn't live long enough to see it. Potter pushed his scroll to the edge of the desk with abandonment, and Severus allowed himself a quick glance before passing on to the next student. The scroll was completely blank. Only Potter's name and the date were scribbled on it. Well, a blank scroll was arguably better than an entirely incorrect one. Only it wasn't. And this was supposed to be the easiest test Severus had constructed in the last decade. Damn you, Dumbledore, he needs help! And Severus needed his job despite Lily's boy collapsing from day to day. Hell? No. Retribution.
Everything is all right, Severus.
Of course, everything was all right except for Potter. The boy couldn't concentrate over a 45-minute lesson without sweating, let alone cope with all the expectations of his other classes and that bloody obsession with the most predictable flying sport in the world. He is unwell.
Don't be so worried, Severus. He'll sort everything out. In time.
Severus sneered as he pushed the parchment toward Dumbledore. His grades. Sliding his half-moon glasses down the bridge of his nose, Dumbledore looked at the grades with his hands casually clasped together, and Severus swore that if he didn't see anything wrong with them, he'd simply hex him. Dressed with secrecy, kind smiles, and caring advice, Dumbledore was just as dangerous as a Death Eater, full of requests, opinions, commands, and lies. Expert in dodging conversations that didn't benefit him directly, unyielding when it came to even consider someone else's best interests. But no, Death Eaters were easier to convince, or to control. They'd place a wand against their victim's throat, and they'd play for a bit, sure, have their way like the cat did with the mouse. But just for a bit. Then death would come, sedate and outspoken, and the party would be over. Right here, death was a tortuously slow process of firstly losing patience and then losing sanity. Hope, however, was always ripped apart from the moment one dared to step foot in these cursed, soaked in lemon aroma quarters. Dumbledore didn't need to point a wand at him to have him obediently crawl to his next mission. A pure talent of his it was to achieve it with a mere suggestion. It was brilliant, outstanding, evil.
Harry's grades were never better, honestly. The difference is that you are now aware of them. Perhaps it's also that you now care.
Care? He didn't care. And if Dumbledore thought he was going to fish out of him any imaginary sentiments using empty innuendos, he'd have to try harder than that. Severus was a spy, a good one. When he needn't be one for Dumbledore, he was one for himself. You think I care for him? Dumbledore's narrowed eyes, peering at him, didn't please him. At all.
Lily?
Severus's heart dropped at the mention of her name. He carefully packed his emotions away and cleared his face from all expressions. He did not need to nod or speak to communicate his affirmation.
"But no,"
argued Dumbledore.
"you care for the boys, Severus."
He told himself that it only made sense. How abruptly he stood up at that. One could not stand being insulted. Unfairness had many faces, he decided. This was a cruel one, cruel and utterly unexpected. As he glared at Dumbledore's unaffected face, he was struck by the impression that only James Potter could have been behind this, behind something so repugnant, so unspeakable, and his vision momentarily blanked with the certainty that, yes, it was. It had to be James's plan. James, who was still laughing at his face through it all. "I hope you are not implying what I think you do, Headmaster. Because if you do..."
"You care, Severus. It is only reasonable."